Well, good evening. I'm Wendy Luget, the University Librarian, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this celebration of the publication of The Wedding Heard Round the World, America's First Gay Marriage. Now, many of you were here, I think it was 3 months ago, when we celebrated, along with President Kaler, the official accepting of the Michael McConnell files to the university. It was a time to celebrate not only that acquisition, but also thinking about the stewardship that we were going to bring to that and the pay it forward in terms of sharing history. And tonight's another momentous occasion for us. The first reason is quite obvious. Michael and Jack, with the great help of Gail Karwoski, reviewed their lives together on some 75,000 pages of content and turned their remarkable, often painful, and ultimately victorious 45-year journey into the book that we're here to celebrate this evening. It's a beautifully written story and has generated a good deal of attention, certainly on the media, and local and national. But second, we want to acknowledge the profound and long-lasting impact of the Michael McConnell files. An archive is really a unique partnership between the people who make the history, Michael and Jack, the people who save the history, in this case, the Tretter Collection of GLBT Studies here at the library's archives and special collections, and the people who use the history. And as it turns out, Michael and Jack not only created history, but they were the first users of that history in writing their book, pouring through scrapbooks and thousands of letters and hundreds of news clippings to write their book. But what about the next generation of users, the future scholars who will consult the collection for their own research, their own books? This is truly the gift that keeps on giving. The McConnell files are without question one of the premier collections here within the Tretter Collection. But with over 3,000 linear feet of material, Tretter is preserving thousands of stories about the GLBT experience. That work and the ambitious transgender oral history project that we recently launched are among the reasons the Tretter Collection has just been awarded the inaugural Newland Simons Award for Excellence in Service to the GLBT community. And this award, This is a national award presented by the American Library Association, their Gay, Lesbian, Bisexual, and Transgender Roundtable. And we'll be getting that award, I think, in June at a national conference, but I'm sure much publicity as well to promote that wonderful recognition. In announcing the award, ALA's president, Sarah Feldman, noted that the Newland Simons Award recognizes the tremendous impact of the Tretter Collection and its leadership in collecting and in preserving the record of the GLBT community from the university campus, but also well beyond that. So I'm honored to welcome you here tonight to our award-winning Tretter Collection, to celebrate the launch of the book, to view our new exhibition, which I hope you'll have a chance to view, and to share inspiration about the importance of history. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Doug Armato, the director of the University of Minnesota Press, who, along with the libraries and the Friends of the Libraries, have sponsored this evening's event. So a big thank you to the press, and welcome, Doug.
Thanks, Wendy. It's great to be here. As Martin Luther King so famously said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. In the pages of Michael McConnell and Jack Baker's The Wedding Heard Round the World, as so ably written with Gail Karwoski, we meet two young men who were not content to sit by and watch that slow bend of history, but who over 5 decades put their strength and their love behind making that arc bend, and bend it finally did. The University of Minnesota Press has been publishing GLBTQ studies for nearly 25 years, since 1992. And so by Michael and Jack's standards, we're kind of late to the game. Though by that of academia, we were well ahead of the times. Since then, we've published more than 100 books in queer studies, but never before we had the opportunity to publish a story of national significance that took place in our own backyard, even less the opportunity to help right a serious wrong on the part of our own institution and our own state government and courts. We've been proud to work with Michael, Jack, and Gail, and to ally with the University of Minnesota Libraries and its unparalleled Tretter Collection in making this story of courage, determination, principle, and love known in all of its remarkable and inspiring detail. It's said that rights are won only by those who make their voices heard, and Michael and Jack spoke, worked, and married openly when silence was the norm and the expectation. Thank you, Michael, Jack, and Gail, for this important story, and welcome everyone to this celebration of the publication of The Wedding Heard Round the World. I believe Lisa's going to speak now.
Thank you all for joining us here this evening. My name is Lisa Vecoli, and I'm the curator of the Jean-Nickolaus Tretter Collection in GLBT Studies at the University of Minnesota Libraries. We are located here in the Anderson Library, and we're thrilled to have you all join us this evening on this momentous occasion. It is my great pleasure to share the stage this evening with Michael McConnell and Jack Baker, whom I've gotten to know during my 4 years here at the archives, and with Gail Karwoski, whom I've only met more recently. But I think Gail and I, having immersed ourselves now in Jack and Michael's lives, we formed this odd little nucleus of...
It's a marriage.
Yeah. Oh dear, let's not start that. I want to take the opportunity to ask Gail and Jack and Michael some questions, and then give you the opportunity to ask some questions. But before I do that, I just want to run through a little timeline with you, because I know not all of you have read the book in advance, and so there are timelines on your chairs to give you a sense. I'm not expecting you to read that or memorize that now. It's just for you to have. But just to give you a little sense of what we're talking about when we're talking about what Jack and Michael accomplished. In 1970, Jack was a first-year law student at the University of Minnesota, and Michael was finishing a work contract at a library in Kansas City before moving here to reunite with Jack. On May 18th, 1970, the two of them went to the courthouse in downtown Minneapolis, where they were the first same-sex couple to apply for a legal marriage license. They were denied. The clerk of court at that time was Gerald Nelson, and that is the reason that these decades later, the court case is Baker v. Nelson. Michael had been offered a job at the University of Minnesota Libraries, and when the Board of Regents heard about the marriage application, they denied the job offer and refused to ratify it, and the job offer was withdrawn. There were lawsuits about both the marriage application and the job, and over the coming years after that, Jack and Michael would lose both of those lawsuits. In 1971, in an attempt to gain some kind of standing for their relationship, Michael adopted Jack. And in the process, Jack's legal name was changed to Pat Lynn McConnell. And in August of 1971, in Blue Earth County in Mankato, Michael went to the courthouse and applied for a marriage license for Michael McConnell to marry Pat Lynn McConnell. And that marriage license was granted. There may have been some confusion, but a legal license was granted. And on September 3rd, 1971, Jack and Michael were married by Reverend Roger Lynn in South Minneapolis. And Roger's with us this evening. So thank you for being here, Roger. So that gives you a little bit of a sense of a few of the things Jack and Michael did, a very few of the things they did. As you can see, the timeline goes on for 2 pages. There's a lot of activity and a lot of activism and a lot of leadership. But just to kind of get us rolling a little bit, in the book, Michael, you talk about meeting Jack and thinking he was gorgeous and having a movie star smile, but maybe being a little bit too good to be true. Jack, do you remember meeting Michael in 1966?
Yeah. Yes, I do. I was 22 years old, in my 20s, and I was looking for someone my age, same height, same features, and I met Mike at a barn party in Oklahoma City, or outside Norman, Oklahoma. Actually, I was at the university. I was entered into the Air Force, and the Air Force sent me down to Norman, Oklahoma, to finish engineering school, and that's where we met.
What did you think of Michael when you met him?
Well, we were both the same age, the same height. He was very, very good looking, tall, thin, and he was quite attractive, and we carried on a good conversation, and I fell in love with him. One of those love at first sight operations.
Haven't heard you tell that story before, so that's lovely. Thank you. The social climate towards gays and lesbians was very different in the 1960s. And in the book, you tell a story about a party that you were both at, and Jack, you were arrested at the party, and there were some consequences to that. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, at the party was what was the name of it, Mike?
All Saints
All Saints Ball. It was held on Halloween, and outside Norman, Oklahoma. And the cops just showed up, and they just announced that they were going to shut it down, and they announced that everybody had to give them their driver's license. I refused to give a driver's license, and I was one of 3 or 4 that ended up in jail that night, and we spent the night in jail while they waited until Monday morning until the court could set a hearing. And eventually the court knew that the whole thing was bogus and just released me on my own recognizance. And eventually I had to spend $50 for an attorney to get the whole thing dismissed. But that was the type of harassment that we got in Oklahoma at the time, and that was pretty much what you ended up with throughout the country. So we just decided that was the end of it. Two can play. That was a game that two can play. We decided we were not going to take that anymore, and we set our own agenda.
Now, the follow-up to that is that the police also called your workplace to tell your employer that you had been arrested, and they called Michael's parents to tell his parents that Michael had been arrested.
That's true. They called my employer and they announced, and unfortunately they ended up talking to the one who I think was gay, and he just said he would handle the call and handle it for the cops, and he did handle it. He didn't do anything with it.
That took care of that. And it was kind of a waste for him to call my parents because I'd already been out to them for several years. It was kind of like, well, yeah, I know he goes to gay parties.
So can you talk about how marriage became such an important part of your lives together?
Mike,
Want me to start?
Yeah, why don't you?
Well, what I like to say is that I'd been around the block before because I had known another fellow before I met Jack and had been with him for a number of years, and we decided that it was not going to work. So I knew from that experience what I wanted in a relationship. So by the time Mr. Gorgeous showed up, I was over a period of months falling in love, and I knew, okay, I think this may be the one. And then we went out to dinner on his birthday, and he said, will you be my lover? Which was another way of saying, will you marry me? And I was ready for the question. And I said, yes, but only if you can find a way for us to get legally married. And he said, oh, well, I guess I'll have to figure that out. I may have to go to law school. And that's where it started.
Do you want to add anything to that?
Well, the place was outside Oklahoma City. What was the town?
Oh, you mean in Bethany, Oklahoma?
Bethany, Oklahoma.
That's where he proposed to me.
That's where I was living at the time, and,
It's
and that's
referred to as a Nazarene city. There were a lot of Nazarenes who lived in that city.
And what people don't realize was that the gay agenda on same-sex marriage actually began in Bethany, Oklahoma, just outside Oklahoma. We set our agenda and we set forward what we were going to do, and we just moved on with it. And like
We'll pass the hat for a plaque at the end of the evening here. Well,
Why not?
I think it better be a very sturdy plaque.
Yeah.
Gail, how did you end up meeting this pair?
I met them originally when I was a graduate student at the University of Minnesota. I met them the year after they were married, but I had heard about them. I think that everybody in the state of Minnesota and beyond had heard about them. So when I finished my master's degree work and I looked for a job as a writer, an interesting job came open, and it was for the Minnesota Student Association, Student Corporation. They needed somebody to kind of publicize, be their PR person. And I thought, wow, this would be really interesting and really fun, and I'll be really involved in change. And of course, the early 70s were all about change. And so I applied for it and got the job, and this man right here was my boss. And so you heard me right away when he didn't have a word. I'm supplying it to him. I'm still doing his PR here. So we met each other quite a long time ago.
And what made the two of you approach Gail to write this book?
Well, Gail, like she just said, I had worked with Gail, and I knew that she could write, and she was working. She was one of the few that was actually there when it all happened, and we were looking for someone who was actually part of the event and could actually tell the story of the times. And so Gail was the person we wanted. And at the time, I did not know that she was a writer of books for young adults, but later we found out that was actually a plus, because the book, in my opinion, is written for teenagers and their parents. And we're hoping that we're hoping to educate parents so that this book stays on the shelves, and that parents will show the book and to their children and to their grandchildren for hundreds of years, which is something that does not happen with most memoirs. That if a 60-year-old writes a memoir for 60-year-olds, it may sit on the shelves and it may be in libraries and used by historians. But this one we want to be a history book for teenagers and their parents, to show them how to enjoy life and how to fall in love.
So in the 1970s, Jack, you were very public. You ran for president of MSA twice, the Minnesota Student Association. You ran for the city council, the state Supreme Court. You spoke at events all over the United States and Canada, and we're kind of the more public in your relationship. And now Michael's a little bit more public. So at your request, all of your documents here at the university are called the Michael McConnell Files, and he's the lead author on the book. Can you talk a little bit about how you've decided who was going to do what and how that might have changed over the years?
Well, Michael was punished by the Board of Regents for applying to marry the student body president, and throughout his life I have been his personal attorney. And so it's just better for the attorney to stay in the background. And so we decided that, or I've decided that it would be better for him to defend himself in the public eye, and that I would stay in the background until the book is published. And now that the book is published, I'm more than willing to speak out with him, to be in public with him. But in general, it was better to not do it.
Another part of that was that in 1980, when we decided we would get off of the public stage, that was the point at which we knew that if we're going to wind up being, like we are, older men, that we are going to need to pay attention to our career. And that meant that it was time for me to actively and intentionally pursue my career. And that was a part of the bargain, that he was public to begin with. I would then move into the career, and in our later years, I would be the one to speak publicly about the issues. And as he said, he would continue to support me in the background. So it was kind of a harmonious working relationship that worked for both of us. We've been pretty good at partnering on things.
I wanted to add to that. When we started to work on the book, one of the first decisions that needed to be made was the structure of the book. Would it be a social history? Would it be a joint autobiography? How would it be that the book would be in its finished form? And so one of the things that I was very aware of as a writer is the audience who would be reading it, of course. And of the two of them, I mean, lots of you know them. You know what it's like to talk with both of them. Jack gets straight to the point, and he stays on the point, okay? And that's fine, because you just know exactly where you are with Jack. He's a great person to work with. But Michael is fun. He's adorable. He laughs. He's a great cook. I mean, you never cross your cook. And he'll talk about emotions. We'll watch movies together. He'll hand me a box of tissues so we can cry together. So when it comes to a story and telling the story from the full point of view, you really want a Michael. So, he needed to be the lead author on this book. There was no question. And then Jack corrected everything that you can imagine. Oh, and he corrected it, and he corrected it, and he corrected it some more.
We were upstairs earlier looking at the exhibit, and I was pointing out to Gail the panel that Jack has already pointed out the corrections of, so which were needed, and mea culpa. So thank you for catching that. Where do things stand in regards to the legal recognition of your marriage in Blue Earth County?
Blue Earth County has, first of all, that as a law student, I've realized that the statute as it was written in 1970 did not forbid a marriage between two persons of the same sex. And so what I learned in law school is that what is not forbidden is permitted. And that's under the rule of law. And so that was why we applied. And when we applied for the marriage license, it was all perfectly legal. But the Blue Earth County was, I assume, was embarrassed, and they have refused to record the license. And so our position is that no court no court has actually annulled the license, and any marriage license that once it's issued remains in effect until some court annuls it, and it's not been annulled. And since Blue Earth County refuses to record it, that is a question that remains work in progress. We're still negotiating with them. We have filed the paperwork with the Social Security needed for the
Survivor benefits.
The survivor benefits, and we have been told that all of the paperwork has been forwarded to the Justice Department. So that we'll get a statement, a letter from them and the Justice Department as to whether the feds will recognize the marriage, but Blue Earth County will not. And at that point, we are in a position to go into a federal court and ask a federal judge to resolve all of the issues. Will or will they won't issue that marriage license? And I think that a federal judge
Well,
will.
it's issued. It's just not
I
filed.
mean, file the marriage record, and I think that once a judge issues the order, then they will be forced to do it. I mean, this is kind of the similar case that's going on in Kentucky, where the clerk of court just simply refuses to record a license simply because in Kentucky she claims that her God tells her that she doesn't have to. And in Blue Earth County, the clerk of court refused to issue it for her own reasons, and we need to get that resolved. So that's simply a work in progress, and we will tend to get that resolved soon.
I'm going to ask just one or two more brief questions, and then I'm going to give those of you in the audience a chance to ask questions. So please think about what you'd like to know from our guests this evening. Gail, what surprised you most during the writing of the book?
I think that I was surprised by how easily we meshed, this four-way marriage here. No, it was like time disappeared when I went back to work with them each time, and I just became part of the household furniture, really. I can't tell you how often I sat around the table with these two, and they talked about a particular scene that we were working on and what they both remembered from the scene, and then we went and got the documents to kind of check ourselves, and they had a full-fledged argument right there with me, like all married couples do. And I was almost tempted to get into it with them. No, this is the way it happened. But I thought, and so I was it was really interesting to me. What surprised me was that I was so much a part of their lives, that they just folded me right in, and I fit there so well. So that was kind of fun and not something that I would have necessarily expected when there had been a 40-something year hiatus between the last time we had sent a Christmas card back and forth and the time that Jack called me on the phone and said, "Hi, I'm Jack Baker. Is this the Gail Karwoski that went to the University of Minnesota?" And his second sentence, incidentally, we talked about how straightforward he was, "Michael and I are now retired and we're collecting our documents. We're thinking about writing our story. Are you willing to help?" That was sentence 2 after 40-something years.
Right to the point.
At which time, Michael got on the phone real quick and said, "By the way, Gail, how are you?"
Yeah.
All relationships are a balance, aren't they?
She knows us well.
So over the years, there have been some rocky times with the University of Minnesota. Do you want to say anything about kind of coming full circle in that and being here now, working at the University of Minnesota Press, being at the University of Minnesota Libraries in the Tretter Collection, and the reconciliation with the university and the conversations with President Kaler?
Yeah, I do. Our history with this university is deep and long, and powerful. It was painful. I was a young man with a great career future, with great experiences, that was a perfect match for the job I had been offered here. When that rug was pulled out from under me, I didn't know whether I would ever work in my profession again. So that was a huge dark cloud for me. However, after we donated our materials to the Tretter Collection and we had the celebration event, President Kaler had apologized at that point, and we had a conversation with him, a private conversation with him. That cloud lifted and went completely away. Now I feel like not only does he have deep ties because he graduated from here and was student body president here, I have deep ties. And our most intimate papers, our life, now resides in the Tretter Collection in ways that are so amazingly powerful, because I see in this collection, and in our papers too, thousands and thousands and thousands of stories. And they're just waiting for people to come, look at these papers, and tell those stories. So as a librarian, it's a dream come true. Now, the sad part of that beginning was painful. However, as Jack said to me sometime after, you know, Michael, this is probably a blessing in disguise. He said that a lot of times in our life. The truth is, it did turn out to be that, because I was offered a job with Hennepin County Library where I got to have a professional librarian's dream. I got to have a profession that went beyond anyone's greatest hopes. I got the widest expanse of activities over the course of my professional career, from public service over a desk to involvement with computer technology and a whole new world of information. So in the end, fabulous. And President Kaler was the person who really lifted that cloud that had hung there for all those years. So very powerful, very powerful.
Lisa, can I add one more tribute? Because Michael got so emotional then. Isn't he wonderful? I mean, he'll tell you the way it is. You really get a story from him. So that's how the book works, you know. But he forgot to add one last detail, and I know he was about to, and that was that this relationship with the University of Minnesota that has been so important to both of them all their lifelong through, has now come in many ways full circle. And one of the ways is that the University of Minnesota Press is publishing this book, has published this book, and there are many members of the press here. I wish you'd raised your hand, because, you know, a lot of you in this room have probably written books and worked with publishers, and I've certainly done that before. And I was telling one of the members of the press today that sometimes writers have the habit of bashing their publishers for not doing what we think that they ought to do. And I got to tell you, it has been a love affair working with these people. They have been so dedicated to making this book's vision come true and come through the way that Michael and Jack meant it to be said. They have been so enthusiastic and so supportive. They have just been incredible. So I really, really want to thank them. And I know that Jack and Michael feel the same way.
Thank you, Gail. Thank you for that. That is true. If I could adopt them all, we would have a whole new family.
This family's now completely out of control.
Love wins.
Finally, before we take questions from the audience, I just want to acknowledge there are a tremendous number of supporters of the collection here this evening, donors, board members, allies, people who have been poured a lot of their time and effort into the collection, and I thank all of you for the many ways in which you have supported the archive and supported the Tretter Collection. Jean Tretter was trying to be here tonight, and I don't see him. Does anybody see him?
I didn't see him.
Oh, that's disappointing. I'm sorry that he wasn't. He was going to try and make it this evening. On the second and third floors of this building, there is an exhibit that is 25 panels on Jack and Michael and their history. We have scratched the surface this evening. Jack's 2 terms as president of MSA, Michael's role in helping to found Gay House, one of the first gay community service organizations in the country, a small sampling of the thousands, and I mean literally thousands of letters that they received from all over the world, their activism, the publicity, the press statement from President Kaler, all of those things are in the panels upstairs, and I hope you'll take a chance to look at those this evening. Books will be for sale out in the lobby, and all 3 of our authors will be signing this evening. look at the exhibit. It'll also be at Pride this summer, and will be available to travel. It'll be here until April, and then it'll be available to travel. So if you're interested in maybe hosting it somewhere, please do be in touch with me. And I need to give a big shout out to Darren Terpstra, who's in the back of the room, for taking my massive stuff and making it look really beautiful. So thank you, Darren. I'm going to ask Eliza and Jocelyn to come up and grab Gail and my microphones. It's hard for me to give it up. If you have questions, they'll come over and let you use the microphone, and then we can take a little bit of time, and then we'll break to have a little sweet and buy books and get signed and look at the exhibit. Thank you.
Hi. So I had the honor of meeting you guys when I photographed you for the New York Times, and it was the first interview that you'd given with the press in 34 years, so thank you for your trust. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about your decision to return to privacy and how it maybe relates to your ultimate decision to take control over your own narrative.
Shall I start? I got it. Our return to privacy was for two reasons. One, we had been very active for over 10 years at that point, and traveling all over the country. And as I mentioned a little earlier, part of this was our understanding that this was all great and it was very powerful, but the reality was going to come home to roost when we were older men, and whether or not we had the means to survive. So part of the decision was that Jack said, we need to get off the public stage so that you can have your career. And by that time I had begun working for Hennepin County and begun to build my career, so it was time to do that. The other piece of that was we had been so public that every time we went to the grocery store or every time we went any place, people would stop us and say hello to us. I recall being, for example, in JF Kennedy Airport in New York, and this guy walked right up to me out of the blue and said, I know you, you're from Minneapolis. That was what our life was like, and it was very public, but we needed our time together. So it was time to spend our time together and build.
Plus, we also had accomplished the goal that we had set, which was Michael agreed to be my lover if we got married. And since we got married, it was up to others to defend their own right and to push forward. So we let that issue run its course, which I did not expect would take 40-something years, but we decided that others would do it.
Right.
Thank you all for your amazing and courageous work and living your lives so openly to help other people be able to do the same thing or to aspire to that. But because this particular evening is about history and a body of knowledge that will exist after you are no longer in Minneapolis to talk about it. I don't know what the timeline in your book is, but I saw a couple of glaring missing events from the timeline that you have on our chairs, namely the Daughters of Bilitis and the first march on Washington for gay rights in the 60s. And I wondered why those were not here, because they were extremely important forerunners. It's like history is important, as we're learning by places like Texas trying to delete the existence of slavery and Holocaust deniers and so forth. And so the documentation of people's lives and the context of their activism is important to include as many foremothers and forefathers as we can, to let people know that this just didn't appear out of the blue, and to acknowledge people whose work affected our abilities to do our work later.
thank you for the comment, and I'm going to answer that because I put together the timeline. The timeline is in no way intended to be representative of the GLBT experience. There is very little L, B, or T in the timeline. That's not the story. This is the story of Jack and Michael, and it's really intended to be the story of Jack and Michael. And even so, it was incredibly difficult to pull it down to 25 panels. We have 34 amazing boxes with tens of thousands of pages of material just from these two men and their life story. And I welcome the opportunity to tell all of those other stories, but that's the one I was telling with this exhibit. So the point is taken, and it's always a sense of frustration that you just can't include, you can only scratch the surface of the story that you want to tell. So, sorry, but you had your hand up, and then Roger will go to you next. So, Eliza, you want to go here, and then Jocelyn, pull up to Roger next.
Hi, my name is Tom Schuster, and in the fall of 1969, I attended one of the earlier free events at Kaufman Union at the Men's Lounge, which came to be kind of the home for our group, kind of a fledgling group of, I don't know, Jack might remember this, maybe 50 core members, something between 50 and 100 core members. And then, but I also don't recall, and I want to let you fill in the pieces here. I don't recall that the gay community was all that keen on the idea of gay folk getting married. It seemed like the mood of that time, which was very revolutionary, was heterosexual marriage was not a model that gay folk should be emulating, that we should be creating our own institutions and our own ways of connecting and forming relationships. So I guess I want to just see what you guys felt at the time, if you felt a lot of support for the idea of getting married, or if people thought that that was the wrong, approach.
You're absolutely right. It was not a popular idea, but what was going on at the time was the anti-war movement, and one of the things that I'm quite proud of doing was that when I was student body, my predecessor had taken over Morrill Hall, not Morrill Hall, but the Student Union and Kaufman Union, and was demonstrating against the war. And I chased them all out, and I said, we're not going to do that. We're going to push on gay marriage, and we're going to do on gay activism. That took them all completely by surprise. But the generation that were joining, that you were talking about, the 50 or so that was forming free, they were not for that at all. But I was 10 years older than they were, and I knew that at a certain point you have to realize that sex does get old, and and you have to build a life on the companionship, and we pressed that issue, and ultimately we prevailed. But there was hostility. You're right.
I get to comment too, because he has his perspective, I have mine. But the deal is this. Yes, I think most gay males during that time were focused on the issues that I had personally moved long past. Sex, not that I was a prude, I wasn't, but what I was focused on was love, commitment, and relationships. Relationships with my family, with the person I love, and with friends and others who loved me and I loved. That was what sustained me. Many gay men, especially during that time, were not interested in that aspect of the gay liberation movement. Many women during that time found the idea of marriage a heterosexual institution of oppression of women, and they didn't want anything to do with that. We both understood that it was much bigger than that. the institution of marriage in this culture and in this society acts as a distribution of rights, privileges, and wealth. And if you can't participate in that, then you are less. And that was not something either of us was going to buy. Full and absolute equality, no exceptions, no excuses, period. That was our mantra. And that's what we talked about during those times. A lot of people didn't understand that. I think that the rapid move to marriage equality in this country in recent years is because gay people began to talk about the same things we were talking about in 1970, and that is love, commitment, relationships, and absolute equality. And I haven't found any young people, millennials, yet who will accept anything less, not one single iota less. So I'm very hopeful that the future is taking that vision we had in 1970 and projecting it far beyond us.
So Roger, you had a question or a comment. The mic's right behind you.
Actually, my question was the same. But maybe we can go a little bit farther. It seems to me that the church needs to be in the business of supporting loving relationships rather than prohibiting them, and that we're measured not by who we hate, but by whom we are able to love. Could you say a little bit more about the spiritual aspects? I mean, that this was a religious ceremony that
Yes.
you engaged in.
Yes.
And, it could have been just a civil ceremony.
That's
so,
true.
For you, could you speak a little bit about the spiritual aspects of marriage for you?
Well, I consider myself a spiritual person. And I don't know if I told you this, Roger, but my mom was Methodist. So, I mean, my father was Baptist and she moved to the Baptist church, but was Methodist. I'm a spiritual person. That's a dimension of my life. And it was important to me that I have that kind of blessing of our relationship. That's why we wanted you. That's why we didn't go for a civil ceremony. And I believed what Jesus said about love. I think that's what he was about, and I think that's what has traveled through the millennia. And that resonates with me, and I believe that that's an important part for me and others who have that same kind of view. For me, that's the spiritual aspect of our relationship. It's the love that this man preached 2,000 plus years ago. And it's still strong.
Very well put. And I want to say that the two of you are one of my more successful marriages.
Thank you. Pretty good.
Part did your family life, your early family life, your mothers and fathers, and the way you were raised, what part did that play in giving you the strength that you had to go through this at such a difficult and a young age?
Well, I'll speak for myself, and then Jack can tell you about his. But I came from a strong family, and when I say strong family, I mean strong men and strong women. And I don't mean one was less equal than the other. Strong women. So I had great examples. And I recall that my mom said to me one time, "Always remember, Michael, you are as good as anyone else." And I took that to heart, and I always believed that. And that's the reason that I believed when I told Jack, "Yes, I will commit to you, but you have to find a way for us to get legally married." That was probably my mother's voice speaking through me about, you're as good as anybody else. I believe that under the Constitution, I'm an American person. I came from a good family with good values. I was taught those values. I embraced those values, and I brought those forward in my life and I expected to live my life fully with all of those beliefs. My parents and my family, all my family, I'm talking cousins, aunts and uncles, everybody in my family, when Jack and I became a couple, we were seen as a couple in my family, the same as my brother and my sisters, or my cousin and their wife or husband or whatever. When Michael and Jack came, it was Michael and Jack, and we were treated the same as any other couple in this family. Longevity in relationships in our family is a tradition, and the fact that we have been together for so many years, it seems very natural for us, I think, in our family. So my family knew that I was gay in my teen years, and I always lived openly without fear, guilt, or any of the other things that many other gay people suffered under. For that, I thank my family for standing with me and loving me.
Let's do one more question. Did you want to respond, Jack?
No, I was just going to say that my parents died when I was 3 and 4, so I really didn't know my own parents, and I ended up in a boarding school that was funded by the county but run by the Catholic Church, and so I kind of actually taught myself. I grew up there. I was there for 11 years, 9 months, and I really didn't have any parental guidance. It was just what I learned at the Catholic boarding school.
She asked my question. Oh, all right. Uh-oh. Let's finish. We'll finish there.
In the speaking that you all did in the early 70s, you had this sort of privileged opportunity to travel the country and witness a nascent gay liberation movement in all these cities you were going to.
Absolutely.
I mean, few people at that time probably got to see what you did. Who Kameny and Giddings and who else? I don't know.
Right.
But I mean, I'm just curious, what do you remember about that? What are some of the things you learned by doing that? What are some of the impressions you have of that time and these communities you were entering into? What were you seeing? Just curious about some thoughts.
I'm going to say something that's going to kind of freak you a little bit, probably. You're right. We traveled all over this country and to several places in Canada, and we interacted with, quote, leaders from the modern gay movement and from the old homophile movement, including Giddings and Kameny and many others. But we also knew a lot of others who were in the new activist, more militant gay movement. Most people don't really understand and don't know. There's kind of a bias from the East and the West Coast where people seem to believe everything begins and ends. I got news for you. If you were in Minneapolis in 1970 through 74 or so, you would know that many of the issues and the fights that came started right here on the West Bank. So it's this is a place that generated future think like you can't believe in the gay movement. And lots of people came from all these other places here to interact and learn. And as we traveled, we shared these ideas around the country. I think that that's important for people to understand. Minnesota gets the bragging rights.
Right. Bragging rights on same-sex marriage belongs to the University of Minnesota. So don't let anybody ever tell you otherwise. That's exactly right.
Can you talk about that, Dan?
Well, the first student conference was held on the West Bank gay conference was held on the West Bank. The building is now torn down, but yes, it was done and it was put together by Chesborough.
Jim Chesborough?
Jim Chesborough, right. And the university, the Board of Regents refused to allow it to be held on campus, and that's why it was held on the West Bank.
In Dania Hall.
In Dania Hall. And it was quite popular. It was well attended. Caused a lot of problems, a lot of arguing, and people walked out, and the usual things that you get in those kinds of conferences. But at least we held it.
There is much more information about all of this at the Tretter Collection,
Absolutely.
available for you to peruse at your leisure. I want to thank all of you for being here this evening. It's been, I think, a tremendous conversation and discussion. I want to thank you for joining us. There are books for sale. Jack and Michael and Gail will all be signing books. The exhibit is up on the second and third floors. But mostly, I want to thank Gail for her work, a tremendous job in bringing Jack and Michael's story, but Michael's voice through in the book. It's a delight to read. And of course, I absolutely want to thank Jack and Michael. It has been my sincere pleasure to build a relationship with you over the past 4 years.